who we'll be addressing right now is the chief haram eunuch, who was a black eunuch of the women. He was a keeper of the women, of the royal women. Okay. So one rarely finds a eunuch who has, like him, an open forehead, a well-made nose, large, clear eyes, a small mouth, rosy lips, dazzling white teeth, a neck of exact proportion, without wrinkles, handsome arms and legs, all the rest of his body supple and unconstrained, more fat than thin. Jean-Claude Flachat observations sur le commerce et sur les arts de nu partie de l'Europe, de l'essai, de l'Afrique et même des Indies orientales. I don't know if I said that right or not, but I was working my hardest to try to pronounce that stuff. Here we go. The second paragraph. So runs a description of the chief haram eunuch of the Ottoman Empire by the French merchant Jean-Claude Flachat, a frequent visitor to the Ottoman palace during the early 1750s. So that would be the 18th century. He was speaking of a man who had been enslaved in his native Ethiopia, transported to Upper Egypt for castration, then sold to Cairo's slave market. He would have been presented to the imperial palace by the Ottoman governor of Egypt or one of Egypt's grandees, and entered the haram as one of several hundred subordinate haram eunuchs. He would have worked his way up the haram eunuch hierarchy over several decades before achieving the ultimate office on the death of his predecessor. In employing East African eunuchs in this way, the Ottomans were following a venerable tradition. So this was a venerable tradition. This was a tradition. Tradition, this is coming from Merriam-Webster. A tradition is a belief, custom, or behavior passed down within a group or society over time. So this tradition is nothing new. It's been passed down within a group or society over time, through time. Now, there's another word here. Let's examine that word. It is vulnerable. Let's look up that word. Vulnerable. Vulnerable is an adjective describing someone or something that commands deep respect and admiration, typically due to their age, wisdom, character, or long-standing history. So in this case, vulnerable is used as a long-standing history that deserves, because it's something that commands deep respect and admiration. So this is a deep respect, admiration, long-standing tradition, dating back long ago, being passed down within a group or society. And he's Ethiopian. Okay, so I'm going to read that third paragraph again. In employing East African eunuchs in this way, the Ottomans were following a venerable tradition. The use of eunuchs as guardians of a ruler's inner sanctum, which I mentioned before. They were what? Bodyguards. They were guardians, keepers of men, women, children. They were cupbearers, armor bearers. They were people being used in tapestry of dressing the king, dressing the queen, keepers of the palace, keepers of treasury. Depending on what empire the eunuchs were employed under, that will determine what they were used for, depending on the need of whatever the empire wanted to use them for. A lot of them were used also for sex slavery. Just want to point that out. Okay. Now, going back to the reading, the use of eunuchs as guardians of a ruler's inner sanctum dates to some of the world's earliest empires. So how long ago did this eunuch or the use of eunuchs occur or happen? Some of the world's earliest empires. Meaning as at the beginning, at the start, eunuchs were being used. Before Christ Jesus of Nazareth was born, eunuchs were being used. Before the law was written by Moses, or the law of Moses that was written by Moses or by his subordinates, before that was being written, eunuchs were being employed. And eunuchs were being employed in the 18th century. In the 18th century, and according to this reading, I'm going to read it again. In employing East African eunuchs in this way, the Ottomans were following a venerable tradition. The use of eunuchs as guardians of a ruler's inner sanctum dates to some of the world's earliest empires. Stone friezes from the Neo-Assyrian Empire, which ruled northern Iraq and Syria from 911 to 612 BCE, or BC for those who are Christians or Catholics, depict smooth-cheeked young men, eunuchs, attending the heavily bearded emperor during his hunts. In fact, virtually all pre-modern empires in the Eastern Hemisphere, with the notable exceptions of Western Europe and Russia, employed eunuchs at their courts. Now it says Neo-Assyrian Empire because there's different versions of the Assyrian Empire. You had the indigenous Black Assyrians, and then you had people from the north, or because the way the maps work now, Europe is actually in the south. So, but because we live in today, 21st century, we understand the north to be where Europe is at and Africa be in the south, but technically the global south is actually the global north. The global north is actually the global south. But that's neither here nor there. That's another point, talking point for another classroom. But in the context of the 21st century, using the language of today, in the north, the Macedonians came down and started overtaking the indigenous Greeks and the Spartans. Now, there's a long history there, but the indigenous Greeks are actually black. And Alexander the Macedonian and his crew, his peoples, who are white people, called these indigenous people Ethiopians, burnt face. That's what Ethiopian means. It means burnt face. It's a Greek term, which means burnt face. So I'm not saying that the indigenous Greeks are Ethiopian. What I am saying is that that's what Alexander the Macedonian, when he came down from the mountains with his crew and started taking over bits and pieces and pockets of Greek territory in the Mediterranean, what we call Greece today, in that area, that indigenous people were black. So the original Greeks are black. But I would save that for another classroom. But I just want to point it out. And then also the indigenous Assyrians are black people. Later on, you also had white people coming from what we call today the Middle East, which is really Northeast Africa, Southwest Asia. I don't typically like to use the term Middle East because that's a relatively new term. I like to say Northeast Africa, Southwest Asia. Okay, so as it pertains to the Assyrian Empire, there are different versions of the Assyrian Empire. You have Syria, Assyria, and then you have indigenous Syrians, indigenous Assyrians. You have later white people who are genetically related to the white Euros and from Macedonia. They're the same people. They're genetically the same people. Okay, I'll bring that out another time. But they are the same people. So you have white people in the Middle East, what we call the Middle East, Northeast Africa, Southwest Asia. And you have people in Europe, in the Macedonian area, who are genetically related, who are the same people, coming down from their mountains and warring with the people in pockets. And then taking the global stage later on. But as in this context of Neo-Assyrian, you had different stages of the Assyrian Empire. Later on, it was after the white Middle Eastern people began to take over certain parts of different empires by, what did they do? They infiltrated the empires, set up little pockets. They had their own little roles in the kingdom. And eventually, once they got to a certain point, working their way up, they overtook the kingdom or those empires. Miscegenation, breeding, interbreeding, and eventually they created a group of people within. They stopped breeding with other than the locals or the indigenous people and only start breeding with themselves, creating the hierarchy of what is referred to as the white Assyrian people. But they're not really Assyrian. They're just Assyrian. Okay. But this is an overview, so I'm not going to do the deep dive. I'm just preparing for the deep dive for later on down the road for another classroom. Okay. So, all right. So that's all I want to talk on that. But this article, there's more to read, there's more to go through. I just wanted to address that there were different types of eunuchs, and depending on the empire and the time frame that they're in, will dictate what the usage of the eunuch was, why they were employed under certain empires. Okay, they had different roles. All right.